Hey everybody, welcome back to the Engineered Angler. In a couple of videos past, I designed and made some surf casting jigs that I make out of stainless steel drinking straws. In this video, I'm going to show you how I'm going to improve that design and actually come up with a couple of new designs, and we'll build those and paint them, so stick around. Here's a collection of tests and weird little prototypes that never really worked. Even going with bigger, heavier tubes, bigger slices, broader areas where you might get more drag, didn't really get much to work. But I've got an idea for something, I think, based on this flat front design that will give me, at the very least, the sort of random action as you twitch it. Besides action, I wanted to do one other thing, and that was to eliminate the wire going through this. Now, it's not that hard to put in there, but it is an added complication, right? And it really shouldn't need it. Really, theoretically, I've got this heavy steel body. I should be able to attach everything I need onto that without any wires. So before we move on to new designs, let me review a little bit of a flaw that my original reef rocket has. And while I really like the aesthetic of this and actually the action of it as well, it has a little bit of a flaw, and that is that the head weight actually becomes detached from the body. So I end up with this sort of shimmying head here. It isn't like a fatal flaw, it's not going to come apart, but it is at the very least an aesthetic flaw, and it does allow the head and the body to spin separately, which to me is problematic. And I came up with a technique that'll allow me to fix this one, and also to make sure that this doesn't happen to any more that I make like this. First, let's make some of the new ones. If you watched the video where I actually made these, you might remember that I actually had two diameter tubes, one just a little bigger than the other. One is 6mm and the other one's 8mm outside diameter. And I made this one out of the 8mm. And the modification today is going to give us two things. One, it'll give us a little better action. The other thing it's going to do, it's going to put the weight on the inside and allow us to connect all our split rings to the tube itself. And all right, so I already have the larger diameter one cut to 3.5 inches long, and I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing with this one. And I'm just going to use this pipe cutter to make quick work of it. All right, I've got my raw materials now. I'm going to use my little machinist's vise. Unlike this little sort of carpenter's vise, it has steel jaws, but they're smooth steel jaws. And these things are just plastic and not tough enough. First thing I want to do is make a mark at 1.25 inches from the end. And then I want to stick this in the vise so that it's at a 45-degree angle. And that line I just drew is showing right at the top of the jaw. Now, the exact angle isn't that critical, but I want to try to get it close to 45 and get it parallel with this. The idea is to crimp this down so the flat spot is in the center of the tube. And that's kind of why you need a vise. And that should give us a nice centered pinch part. And there you go. You've got a nice long flat spot with an angled point of bend. And to help give me a nice, good, smooth, flat spot, I'm just going to sort of move it around on the jaw here where it has a little more leverage near the center. And give it a couple good hard pinches so it's not pinching it all at the same time. All right, so the next step is to create a little bit of an angle cut right here at what's going to be the back end. And that should be maybe right at a 45 as well. You can do this cut with whatever you have around that'll cut. A hacksaw works just fine. Now I'm going to cut mine with a little cutting disc on this rotary tool, and I've stuck it back on the vise so I don't hold on to it and burn my fingers like I always do. All right, that looks good. So while we still have our tube in our vise, I'm going to start adding weight to it. Let me show you how I'm going to do it. All right, here's my assortment, and I happen to have these tiny little split shot that fit in there perfectly. And my idea is as I keep it in the vise, I'll keep dropping these guys in there, and as I stack them in there, I'll take this long drift pin punch and press them together with a little bit of a friendly tap with a hammer, and probably put a few drops of crazy glue in there. If you don't have a drift pin like this, you can just cut the head off a nail and do the same thing. All right, so I'm going to use about a dozen of these little split shot, and as I put them in there, I'll compact them. I've already got one in there, so maybe I'll put a couple in, and then I'll give it a couple of taps. Doesn't have to be hard, just to compress them in there so they don't want to roll out. All right, so now I have a nicely head-weighted lure, and I don't have to worry that there's an exposed weight or something to fall off or come loose. All right, so now that I got this weighted, I'm going to put a couple of drops of crazy glue in there, and I'm also going to go ahead and bring the bigger diameter one to the same stage. I won't bore you with the same exact process because that's what I'm going to do. So I'll get back to you when they're both in the same stage. All right, so I've got this one at the same stage. And one little trick I want to show you, because one of the things you have to kind of focus on is making sure all these little sharp edges you're creating with cuts and drilling and all that have to be sort of rounded off and smoothed off, or else it might, you know, kind of mess with your line. So this little bit right here is just a countersinking bit, and I'm just going to use it to sort of bore out this cut. And that rounds off the inside edge. And then with a little bit of emery cloth, I can sand off the edge on the outside, and that'll leave it nice and blunt. So with this larger diameter, I can use slightly larger split shot. And instead of using this little thin punch, I'm going to use a punch that's more appropriate to the diameter of this, so I'm not pushing the lead all over the place. So you adjust to the diameter of your tube, and it'll work. Okay, so you can see these are at the same stage, and notice that the angle on the very back, the tail that I cut, is in the same orientation as where we pinched it down. So they're both parallel like that. All right, now we just need to drill a couple of holes. Well, that's one way to clean up. Just blow the dust into another part of the shop. Okay, I've got a tiny 1/16 inch bit in here. And so first, I'm going to go ahead and punch some little marks in there so the bit won't drift on me. All right, I got all 3 holes drilled. Now I'm just going to clean them up a little bit with a file and drill the other ones. So I'm just going to sort of freehand, I've got it halfway drawn here, a curve that kind of resembles the curvature of the blade of a butter knife, but just so it'll round up here nicely. And I'll take most of this off with the rotary tool, and then I'll probably grind it a little bit with a grind wheel, and then come back with the file and smooth it off a little bit. So after some filing with a very fine file to get the sharp edges off, and a little bit of polishing with some steel wool, actually I got a pretty nice result. Let me show you. You can see it looks a little like a butter knife. The small one looks pretty good too. And now it's just a matter of mounting it on the lure bow and getting it into the paint booth and making some decisions on colors, I guess. So we'll get them both going at the same time, and we'll figure out what color we're gonna paint them as we go along. Let's do the little one first, because I think that one's going to be a simpler paint job, because I really don't have a whole lot of room to do much. But I really like the idea of going red and gold. So I'm going to wipe it down with alcohol, and as usual I'm going to have to turn on the extractor fan to get all the fumes out of this little booth. And so that means probably a little bit of background music. I might do a little voiceover, but we'll see. All right, well, I turned this into a bit of a macro look, and this one is just straight up red on gold. Really like it, that gold bottom, it's really flashy. And as always, I'm gonna use mid coat, just a sort of a sealer primer kind of thing for the paint, and that's the polyacrylic by Minwax. I cut it 15% with distilled water. And then we'll put a UV clear coat on it, and I'll put it in the UV chamber to dry. And if you're enjoying these kind of videos, let me know. And subscribe if you haven't, and throw me a thumbs up. It really does help grow the channel. All right, let's move on to the clear coat. All right, in the meantime, I'm going to show you how I'm going to make the repair on this little lure. Remember, the head was all loose. Now, it's not loose anymore because I put a little bit of UV resin as glue, but that's just a very temporary thing, just to hold it in place while I do the permanent gluing. And what I'm going to do is use some fast set epoxy, and I'm going to use this little plastic bag to be able to pipe the resin down into this slot so it fills the cavity, and then fills around the back of the head and around the wire that runs through the head, and that should hold everything in place and keep it from wobbling and coming loose. And this time I'm going to use probably twice as much as I really need here. So what I do is I just get this stuff down in the bag, and then I'll just knead it. And that's red paint, by the way, not blood. All right, so the next deal is I'm going to take and just cut the little tiny corner, just barely getting any kind of opening on that, like a baker might use a piping bag for decorating a cake. It really is amazing how quickly this stuff sets up. And I'm just gonna tap it to make sure it just all goes to the bottom. And I'm gonna use this little nail to keep my my hook eye open, and that should be a good repair. So while I'm waiting for the lures to set up in the UV chamber, I'm dressing some treble hooks because I think the lures look a little better with the back treble hook kind of dressed. Now, I don't do a great job, but it's better than a bare hook. All right, it's been probably a couple hours. I let the lures dry overnight just to be sure that everything was set so I'd get a good clear coat. One other thing, I took the original reef rocket that I made the repair on, and I gave it a little bit of a touch-up paint job just to kind of hide all those teeth marks. And then I put a clear coat on it too, just to see if I could kind of revitalize it. So let me show you that one first. I think it's looking pretty good. Almost as good as it did when I first made it. All right, here's the one that is primarily gold and red. It looks pretty sharp. And then the one that I did in almost like a mackerel color, really it turned out. I decided to put a big eye on it. And I just think that looks really cool. All right, I'm really digging the way these things came out. I'm gonna go ahead and rig them up, and then we'll get down to the dock and see if I can get some shots of them in the water. See how they behave. And hopefully the wind noise isn't too bad. We'll give this guy the first shot. The best part of this lure action is the flutter on the drop, but it's really hard to capture on film, especially in this murky water. The darting action is really good. And I think here you can kind of see the flutter on the drop. Okay, let's change to the mackerel color lure. This one, I got a little help from my wife on the camera. You can really see the flutter of this lure as it drops. Well, that's it for this video, and I hope these little lures give you some inspiration. Maybe you can come up with something else to do with those drinking straws. I'll run a few photo slides at the end of this video. Thanks for watching. I'll catch you on the next one.